All the mics will be live.
Yep, all mics will be live, yeah. All right, panelist clicks in.
Do you need to do the change presenter?
He's not in.
Oh, yeah, he's not in.
So you copy paste from.
This is how we started a few minutes
Yep.
early.
All right.
Go to.
And we don't need to do anything. We're just gonna say okay, because.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so
Now it's hash. You can change the presenter up there.
Okay. Do you want me to share it out now and have it be up like the slide? That's good.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Because we're not broadcasting yet. Yeah.
And I'll just make sure.
That's in slideshow. Perfect. So then we'll just do the broadcast and we'll be all set.
Let me just minimize this so it's not.
If you don't mind just hanging on until we actually broadcast. Yeah, because I know I did the start one, or it looks like you could just do it there too.
Yeah, let's utilize that.
Yeah, the way we did it.
Yeah.
Don't change anything.
Everybody's on hold.
Just want to make sure everyone's phone ringers are off. And all that.
So. Does anybody else, do you know if Catherine's in her stuff? Are you in on her stuff?
Oh, you can see 19 attendees on hold right now. Not yet.
I mean, this is what is should be displayed.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it is.
no. Or yeah, it is what's
Okay. And
That's the official title we've been promoting, right? Why your company needs dual transformation strategy.
yeah. And the polls will run just as always. Once you're talking about it, I'll queue it up, keep it open for 30 seconds, close it, share the results.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that was for just this webinar. We did that title.
Do you know if it's star one or one star?
It was star one.
Yeah. Exact 4 o'clock.
Yeah, we're going to kick off right at 4.
Okay.
4 minutes.
I'm going to exit out that direction.
Okay.
People are filing in. only a single door, so it takes a little while to get in the door.
I have never joined a webinar early, ever.
Yeah, we should start it. We should announce it at 4 o'clock that we're going to start in a minute, and then
Yeah, that's what we do.
4:02.
Yeah.
Yeah. 3 minutes.
We basically have a lot of A names.
It is, yeah.
Do we have some B? So we have
Alan.
dual
There's
transformation.
a J, there's a lot of R's.
Alan, Alfredo, Alina, Andrew, Angela, Angelica.
Well, the rain passed through pretty quickly, huh?
Yeah, it's a beautiful day again.
Better be nice tomorrow.
I hope so, it might rain, but maybe it'll be just like that, a
Mhm.
quick thing.
It's one of these awkward days where I've got meetings in the morning and afternoon, and then the events in the,
In the middle.
and so I can't decide whether I should wear just one outfit or change into shorts for the, if I don't change into shorts for the event, I'm going to regret it, because it'll be hot and outside, right?
It's supposed to be cooler tomorrow, like high 60s, low 70s.
Oh, really?
Most guys.
That's what we were just talking about, Tara.
So,
Okay, yeah, if you want to register now, or
I am
join,
registered.
okay, and just send us in a,
Send me an email.
if there's any audio issues or anything, just shoot us a, yeah. So we are going to be kicking off in a minute. Nope, we're good, thank you. Are you going to be like right outside here if you need anything? Or are you going to be at your desk?
I'll be right outside. Still a big area, sure.
Yeah.
Got it.
Thanks, Kathleen. All right, 1 minute. Should get ready to.
You're not logged in here. Yeah. Okay. Like the butterfly.
All right. All right. Give it a-
Yeah, do it.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Insight webinar on why your company needs a dual transformation strategy. Please hold tight for just a minute or two as the other audience members get a chance to tune in, and we'll be right back. Welcome everyone to the Insight webinar on dual transformation, how to reposition today's business while creating the future. This is Evan Schwartz. I'm your moderator and director of storytelling at Insight. I'm pleased to introduce our presenter today, Scott Anthony, who is here in our Boston headquarters. Scott is usually based in our Asia Pacific offices in Singapore. He's Insight's managing partner. He is co-author with Clark Gilbert and Mark Johnson of the new Harvard Business Review Press book, Dual Transformation, and he'll draw insights from it for today's webinar. We want to hear from you, so we'll be taking breaks to pose interactive polls and to answer your questions. Just type your question in the dialog box in the upper corner. No need to click on the raise your hand button. Feel free to put your personal perspective or company perspective into your question. I'll be collecting your questions and posing them to Scott. And so now I turn it over to Scott Anthony.
Well, thank you very much, Evan, and good afternoon, morning, or evening to our webinar attendees, depending on where you are joining us in the world. As Evan mentioned, I am lectured. I actually just got in from Singapore yesterday. So started yesterday in one time zone and went through 12 of them as we went through the day. And I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. Just to reinforce one thing that Evan said, we really do want to make this as interactive as possible. So please fire in your questions whenever they arise. I'll stop at least once and maybe twice to try and answer some of the questions that come in. To anticipate one question that is always asked, we will be making the slides available afterwards, so we can save at least one of you from typing in that question. And with that, we're going to dive into the material in front of us. What I'm going to do over the course of the 45 or 50 minutes that we'll have together is first to explain to you the dual transformation imperative, why we think this is important. Second, talk a little bit about the basic framework in the book for dual transformation. And then third, talk a little bit about what is required to lead an organization through a change like this. I think most of you know who you are spending time with now, about who Innosight is. For those of you who don't, Innosight is a strategy consulting firm that helps organizations confront the dilemmas of disruption. That's why we wrote the book Dual Transformation, because we want to help leaders all around the world take the disruptions that are reshaping the global economy and turn them from threats into opportunities, allowing people to reimagine their business and push it in new and exciting directions. And I think everybody recognizes how important this is. It's a little bit of a cliche to say that change is the only constant, as appears on your screen now, but I think this is a phrase that leaders all around the world are telling us has never rung more true. Now, the pace of change has arguably been increasing ever since the scientific revolution, but something seems materially different today. It seems like technologies that once were consigned to the fringes of industries now are touching every part of the global economy. It seems like everyone has to grapple with some of the challenges that exist as businesses and business models that have been safe and protected for decades are ripped apart seemingly in the blink of an eye. The person pictured here, Joseph Schumpeter, has great language to describe what executives all around the world are facing. He wrote a book in 1942 where he introduced an evocative phrase. He described in that book how many people who looked at capitalism didn't have the story quite right. People who looked at capitalism historically, going back to Adam Smith, talked about the invisible hand, talked about how markets were administered. What Schumpeter argued in Capitalism, Socialism, and Demography is that what really is the essence of capitalism is how structures are created and, more importantly, how structures are destroyed. He had this phrase, the gale of creative destruction, to describe this process, and that gale has never blown more fiercely. We've been talking to leaders about this and recently released a research report that highlights some of the things that people are telling us. 80% of the executives that we recently surveyed tell us that they need to fundamentally transform their organization in response to changes taking place in their markets. Only about half of the people we talked to said that they're confident that they are prepared to make that change. And perhaps even more tellingly, 81% of executives say the new things they're working on get less attention than they should because of all the implicit biases that exist in their organizations towards legacy businesses. This is one of the fundamental challenges that executives have today, in that the things that they are doing that are required to continue to run today's engine, to run that engine more effectively, more efficiently, to improve their operations, are crowding out the space to do the new and different that's required for disruptive growth. And what kind of impact does that have? Well, if you've been a fan of Innosight, you know one of the longitudinal pieces of research that we do tracks the lifespan of companies on the S&P 500. This number has been following a trend line down for decades, and our most recent research on this suggests that 50% of the companies on today's S&P 500 index will not be on that index in 10 years. What will happen to them? Well, some of those organizations will still exist, but will be overtaken by faster growing rivals. Some of those organizations will merge and form bigger conglomerates. Some of those organizations will follow in the path of Eastman Kodak, Radio Shack, and others, and will go through a jarring event like bankruptcy. Who will replace them? Well, in some cases, it'll be companies that have existed for a while that take the next step in their growth trajectory, but increasingly, what we're going to see is companies that don't exist today becoming the giants of tomorrow. Facebook is a 13-year-old company that recently passed 2 billion users around the globe and is now one of the 10 most valuable companies in the world. This is what we are going to increasingly see. What are the forces behind this that are driving this kind of change, that are powering these gales of creative destruction? Well, if you know Insight, you know we were founded by legendary Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen, who coined the term disruptivation, or at least brought it into the business lexicon. So not surprisingly, we're very carefully watching disruptive trends all around the world. There are 6 specific ones that we're watching most closely. The first is the rise of robots and drones, illustrated here by the picture of a prototype that Amazon has built that will enable drone-based delivery of packages. Alibaba in China is working on a very similar solution. When you combine that together with the next trend, additive manufacturing, 3D printing, if you're in the business of making stuff, of distributing stuff, your world is going to change. The woman pictured here, after she graduated from Harvard Business School, came up with an idea to create a printer that would 3D print makeup of any color or hue. Now, this particular idea didn't end up working. She pivoted the business to create an app that would do something similar, but you're seeing some relentless improvement in additive manufacturing that's going to change the way that we produce and then distribute and then sell products. The next thing we're looking at is smart connected devices, the disappearance of computing, the rise of the Internet of Things. We illustrate this here with a picture of a device that's given to you if you check into one of the hotels that's connected to Disney's flagship theme park, Disney World, in Orlando, Florida. This is the Disney Magic Band. It allows Disney to do an even better job of executing one of the world's most beautiful business models. What happens when you go into a Disney theme park? You go in, Disney picks you up by your ankles, they turn you upside down, they shake every cent out of your pocket, they put you back on your feet, and you leave with a great big smile on your face. Done even more effectively as Disney uses devices like this to understand their customers and their patterns at a deeper level. That then feeds into our fourth trend, big data analytics, the rise of the quantified self. As we have smart connected devices and the disappearance of computing, we're getting all this information that allows us to do things in different sorts of ways, to measure, analyze, predict, and ultimately manage our own lives in ways that we couldn't have a generation ago. The picture that you see here is real output from the Fitbit that I've reliably and religiously worn for the past few years. If you look really carefully, you can see it was a pretty good step day for me. I got above the magic 10,000 steps, but not a particularly good sleep day. Probably because I was worried about the fifth trend, everything as a service. I'm sure you've heard a version of the digital incantation, the phrase that you use to begin to get people excited about digital. The world's largest taxi company, Uber, owns no taxis. The world's largest media company, Facebook, produces no content. The world's largest retailer, Alibaba, has no inventory, and so on. Everything is being turned into a service. Even the humble consulting industry is running the risk of being ripped apart as new solutions come to enable people to get consultants on demand. If you go to the website pictured here, hourlynerd.com, you can even rent a nerd for an hour. What you do with that nerd is completely up to you. Of course, we got to worry about more than this in the professional services industry. We got to think about the sixth and final trend as well, artificial intelligence. Why exactly the consultant of the future will still be wearing a tie and have a picture of his or her or its family behind him or her or it, I do not know. But as computing continues to improve, we increasingly are seeing things like Watson from IBM moving into new sectors and artificial intelligence changing industry after industry. Now, Evan mentioned at the beginning we want to get your voice in the webinar, so we're going to get your perspective here. Now, we've combined a couple of these into one, but we want to hear from you which of the things we talked about will have the biggest impact on your business. Robots and drones, choice 1. Additive manufacturing, choice 2. We combine big data analytics and Internet of Things into one, that's choice 3. Everything as a service, the rise of platforms, number 4, or artificial intelligence, number 5. Cast your vote and tell us what you are worried about the most in your particular industry circumstance. Got the poll open on the screen. We can see the results coming in real time. It's exciting stuff. We've got everything as a service pulling ahead of the crowd at 43%. We've got 10 more seconds in the poll, if I remember that correctly, Kristen. Kristen from our team is nodding, so I am correct. All right, we got 75% of you to vote, which is awesome. I hope we can get that many of you to vote in our second poll. Usually the second poll we get slightly but it is a service followed by big data analytics. Artificial intelligence is a strong number 3. I'm guessing we don't have too many industrial people on the phone today, Evan, because robots and drones and additive manufacturing got a single vote between the two of them. But that's interesting. All right, thanks. Let's go back to the presentation slides and talk about what you do in the face of all of this. So the way that we summarize this in the first chapter of Dual Transformation is we borrow and slightly twist a phrase used by the Stark family in the show Game of Thrones or the book on which it's based. That family, you know, has the phrase winter is coming. It's not winter that we're worried about in organizations, it's disruption. Disruption is really coming to every nook and cranny of the global economy. What do you do when you've got one of these gales of creative destruction blowing, when you have to go and figure out how you create the version of yourself? It's in the title of our book. The book is titled Dual Trans, and the title tells you what we intend. The first word, transformation, means a change in form or substance. We're not talking about doing what you're currently doing better, faster, or cheaper. You got to do that, of course. But what we are talking about is a fundamental change in form or substance. This is liquid becoming a gas. This is the caterpillar becoming a butterfly. This is your organization becoming the next version of itself. That's what we mean when we say transformation. The word dual in the title means you're not doing one thing, you are doing two things. This is not a monolithic change effort. Rather, you've got two change efforts that are happening in parallel. The first is what we call Transformation A. This is where you are repositioning today's business to respond to the disruptive forces that are threatening you in your industry. I think one of the clearest examples of this globally is what Netflix has done over the past decade. You go back 10 years ago, if you were a subscriber to Netflix, you were getting DVDs sent to you through the mail. About 10 years ago, Netflix began to experiment with and then began to scale an offering where they shifted providing content from DVDs through the mail to providing streaming content over the internet. Netflix is still doing the same basic job for its customers. You're getting content, you're enjoying content, you're relaxing, et cetera, but the way in which it's doing it has fundamentally transformed. This has allowed Netflix to grow globally and become today a very powerful company that is reshaping media, content, and a range of other industries. That's the first transformation that organizations need to do to reposition today to increase its resilience. Well, probably not surprisingly, if the first effort is A, the second is going to be B. The second part of dual transformation is what we call Transformation B, where you're going to create tomorrow's growth engine. I think one of the clearest global examples of this is what Amazon.com has done over the past decade, as it's become the leading producer of what's known as cloud computing services through its AWS, Amazon Web Services offering. This traces back to an internal effort about 12 years ago now. Internal projects within Amazon were going too slow. So CEO, founder, chairman Jeff Bezos commissioned a team to go and solve that problem. It did. Even more than that, the team recognized that it had tripped across something that could be an exciting opportunity for Amazon. They turned it into an externally facing offering, and today it is something that is producing billions of dollars of revenue a quarter and about $1 billion of net income over the past 12 months. People have long complained that Amazon's a nice business except it doesn't make any profits. Well, Amazon Web Services is a nice business that is growing rapidly and generating profits. This is the dual transformation, simultaneously repositioning today while you're creating tomorrow. Now, if you look at the diagram on your screen carefully, you will notice the B circle overlaps a little bit with the A circle. This is very purposeful. We are not talking about unrelated diversification going into new markets. The companies that we've seen do this well have a C in the equation as well. They're creating what we call a capabilities link between today and tomorrow, where they're taking some of those precious assets that allow them to compete and win in today's business, and they're catalyzing them to go and create exciting new growth businesses. So this is taking what historically was known as the innovator's dilemma that makes it hard for people to respond to disruptive change and flipping that into the innovator's opportunity that allows you to do things that few other organizations can do. Let me give you maybe one or two examples of organizations that have done this, talk about a couple key success factors to doing this well, and then we will open up the floor for any questions that have come in. If you've got a question, don't be shy. Please type it in. Evan will make sure to collate them when we break in just a few minutes to answer them. What you see on the screen here are a few of the organizations that are profiled in the book or ones that we have subsequently researched in some work that we've done that I'll talk about just a little bit later on. Let's see, what will I talk about today? Let me talk about Singapore Post. That's one that's a little bit of a hidden story to most people in global audiences, and one that I know pretty well from the 7 years that I've now spent in Singapore. You go back about 10 years ago and you look at a legacy postal carrier business and you try to make a growth forecast for it, I think any reasonable person would assume this is a declining business. SingPost has managed to almost triple its revenue over the course of the past decade by following a very clear dual transformation strategy. Transformation A is turning the postal branch into something well beyond what you use to mail letters. You can go now to pick up packages from lockers. You can go and pay bills. There's even one not far away from where I live in Singapore that's a bar that you can go and hang out at a Friday night. A very different way to think about how to use that real estate. Transformation B for SingPost is going beyond providing letter services to providing e-commerce and logistic-related services to businesses. The idea here is e-commerce is growing and more companies want to get into e-commerce. They want to be able to deliver packages to people, but they might not have the native capabilities of an Amazon.com or Alibaba or whatever. So SingPost, through a range of acquisitions and through organic activities, has built up a suite of offerings that essentially functions as a logistics as a service business for people in and around Southeast Asia. Alibaba is so excited by what SingPost is doing that a couple of years ago it made a major investment in the organization to take 20% stake in the business. The combination of this A and B, where SingPost has leveraged on core assets like its real estate, like its logistical expertise, has allowed it to dramatically change the company and dramatically improve its growth prospects. I think the other example that I'll highlight from this is Janssen, which is in the top part of the upper right. Janssen is the pharmaceutical arm of Johnson & Johnson. It's a $30+ billion organization today. Transformation A for Janssen is changing the way that it does drug discovery. Historically, all of its drug discovery was done inside the organization by J&J scientists. It dramatically opened up the way that it does drug discovery, working with people in individual labs or research universities. It focused its efforts on a small number of what it calls disease area strongholds. By focusing and opening up its R&D effort, Janssen now has the most productive R&D engine in the entire pharmaceutical industry for several years running. Transformation B is an even more exciting idea. Remember, Janssen makes $30+ billion a year selling drugs to help you manage diseases. The idea for Transformation B is to intercept diseases using some of the technologies we talked about before, sensors, genomics, and so on. They want to be able to predict people who are at high likelihood of getting diseases before they even occur. By intercepting and helping people manage those diseases, yes, of course, they create some risk that people won't buy their pharmaceutical products, but they create the possibility of building a completely different growth engine for the business. So those are, I think, just a couple of examples to show dual transformation in action. Let me show this chart here just to provide another way to summarize the basic framework. And I think, Evan, I've decided that we're going to pause here for questions because I don't want to go too long without getting some voices from the audience. So the guy on the left is Joseph Schumpeter. He is blowing his gale of creative destruction. Transformation A is the protective shield that you are building around your core business. Transformation B is that great big wind turbine that's capturing the energy that exists in that gale and powering the factory that's going to create tomorrow's business. That's Transformation B. And the conveyor belt that's got the materials linking the two, well, that's the capabilities link allowing you to do both of these things at the same time. So I'm going to pause here now, Evan, and see if we've gotten any good, great, or even mediocre questions from our audience to try and bring these concepts to life. If you haven't typed in a question, please feel free to do it now, and we'll try to get a couple voices into the discussion.
Yeah, please type in your questions. We have one really about the C, the capabilities link. Can you talk a little bit more about the process of finding which capabilities should be shared between A and B? Is there a way of knowing which resources and capabilities to choose?
It's a great question. Chapter 4 of Dual Transformation goes into depth about the capabilities link, and it is a truly great question because I have a slide around this in the deck, which I will go put up on the screen here. The question is answered by the first point here, being selective. The simple litmus test that I always ask to say, is this truly a unique capability that can enable us to do new things, is to ask the question, if we are sitting in the offices of our natural competitor, what are we saying we wish we had? What are the things that make our competitors jealous because they can do things that we can? In the case of SingPost, the ability to manage the intricacies of getting something from point A to point B is something that few other people in the region can do as well as it can do. The other question I ask is, if you were to leave your company and go and start up a new company, what would you want to steal? What would you want to take along with you as you were starting that company up? In many cases, asking these questions leads people to realize that what they thought were their capabilities aren't actually their capabilities. When we ask people, what do you have that makes you special? They'll often say, well, we've got a brand. And you say, well, if you started a company up, would you want that brand? No, I wouldn't. I'd want a different brand. Well, maybe it's not that then. Maybe it's something hidden. Maybe it's the way that you do your work. Maybe it's your culture in some cases. In Johnson & Johnson's case, it believes that it's credo, the way that it organizes, the things that prioritize or allow it to go and do things that are more mission-oriented is one of its unique competitive advantages. So that's at least the way that I think about answering that question. Let me highlight one other thing on this page while I've got it up on the screen here. Of all the factors up here, number 3 is the one that I think is the most critical. One of the mistakes that we see people make is they mush these efforts together and they ask everyone to do everything. That doesn't work. The phrase here is one of the mantras by our co-author Clark Gilbert, who actually has done this in 2 separate organizations. First at Deseret News, a media organization in Utah. Second at BYU, Idaho, where he served as president for a few years. The mantra is simple. A does A, B does B. We're not saying that the core business doesn't have a future. We're saying the core business has a bright and exciting future, and it needs a team to deliver against that. We're not saying that's the only thing the organization is doing. It also needs to have a group that is going and pursuing new growth. It has to be a different group that's run in a different way, that's measured in a different way, that's managed in a different way. A does A, B does B.
That's great. I think in the course of that, you've just answered 2 other questions that came in. One of them, does A and B happen concurrently, or does one have the priority? And I think you were very clear that it's...
Yeah, so let me make an additional comment. So it is dual, so you do need to have both of them. The timing of them, though, in the cases we study can sometimes be different. So if you look in the case of SingPost, these were truly happening in parallel. If you look at the case of Adobe, where its transformation A was creating a software as a service model for its core software business, transformation B was getting into marketing analytics. That was done in parallel. If you look at Janssen, it was actually done serially. So first, it focused on transformation A. As that began to get momentum, transformation B was then layered on top. The pace at which you do these things really depends on the pace of change in your industry. In a business like media or retailing or anything related to commerce today, you really got to do both at once. Industries where the pace of change is a little bit slower, you might have an ability to have a little bit of space between the two. But the number one piece of advice we give people is don't forget you've got to do both. If you only do one, you're not setting your organization up for long-term success.
And to what extent should the B team be recruited from the legacy organization?
So first of all, we suggest never calling it the B team, because in most places that has connotations that they're not as good as the A team. But seriously, this is an interesting point. We think that the best B organization blends together carefully selected people from the core business with a reasonable dose of people from the outside. The reason why we think you need both of these things is the people from the outside, well, they're going to push your business in new and different directions. They're going to help you reimagine. They're going to have the skills required to go and do different things. Why do you carefully select people from the core business? Remember, this is not unrelated diversification. You're going to be pulling on capabilities and assets from the core. If you don't have people who know that intimately, who don't speak core language, you don't have networks in the core, well, you're just as well off going and investing in a startup company. Blending those people together in the right way allows you to have the best of both worlds. How about we take one more question if we got it, and then we'll talk a little bit about the leadership side of this.
That's great. We have a question about how to engage top management, especially the leaders of the company, to support consistently working on the transformation B side in parallel with A.
That's a great question. I think some of the material I'm going to share provides at least some starting point answers around it. So let me go back to the slide deck to highlight some thoughts about leadership and what it takes to actually do this. And then we'll pause again in 10 or 15 minutes to see if there are any further questions from the group. All right, so what does it take to lead dual transformation? So far during the webinar, I've taken you through the first 4 chapters of the book. The first chapter talks about the dual transformation imperative. Chapter 2 is transformation A. Chapter 3 is transformation B. Chapter 4 is the capabilities link. The next chapters work through the words that appear on the bottom of the page here, the 4 key leadership behaviors that are required to make dual transformation work. Let me spend a minute talking about each of them. Then we are going to have another poll question. We'll see if we can get more than 75% of you to respond to that poll question, so everybody be ready. First, the courage to choose. One of the aphorisms that exists in the change management literature is you need a burning platform to drive change. We think this is a flawed aphorism because by the time a platform is on fire, the choices that you have are not very good. Either you get burnt to a crisp or you jump and pray. Leading dual transformation requires having the courage to choose before the platform is on fire. This is exactly what Mark Bertolini did at Aetna. Bertolini became the CEO of Aetna in November 2010. It would have been easy to just keep executing what was working for Aetna. Record revenues, record profits. They come out of the Great Recession looking great. The Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, had just been passed. 45 million Americans were now in play. So he could have sat back and relaxed and the next 5 years would have been fine. In the face of all of that, Bertolini and his team decided to blow the business up with the belief that health insurance as we know it was going to need to fundamentally transform, and he and his team wanted to get in front of it. wanted to shift from being a company that sold health insurance policies to companies to, on the A side, providing wellness-related solutions to individuals, where you're providing not just insurance, but you're delivering health outcomes, not just to companies through insurance policies, but to individuals as well. And on the B side, creating healthcare IT solutions that can go to physicians and provider networks. This has allowed Aetna to get well in front of changes in the industry and positions it really well to drive growth in the years ahead. The next thing is the clarity to focus. Another aphorism you'll hear when people talk about innovation is let hundreds or thousands of flowers bloom. That's not a good idea. Anytime we've seen organizations do this, all that results is a lot of dead and trampled flowers. Instead, you need to have the equivalent of what John F. Kennedy did in the early 1960s, when he stood in front of a joint session of Congress and the Senate and committed to send a man to the moon and, importantly, bring him back by the end of the decade. You need moonshots. You need to pick a few strategic opportunity areas that have the potential to create the next version of your company. The clarity to focus is absolutely critical, so you make sure that you get people to make sure their efforts are going in the right direction. Now, here's a paradox. You need the clarity to focus, but you also need to recognize any individual effort you're going to work on isn't going to work perfectly. So you need to also build the curiosity to explore, to test, to experiment, to learn, to figure out what tomorrow's strategy will be. Here's an example for the Moonshot program. As they go, as the United States begins to go to figure out what it takes to actually get people to the moon, nobody knows exactly what form of long-lived rocket is going to work. So intentionally, a couple different efforts are started, a lot of experiments are run until ultimately a winning solution emerges. You need to have this baked into your culture. We display this by having a picture of one of the things that allowed the Wright brothers to crack a problem that had confounded people for decades. Birds could fly, but humans couldn't. One of the ways the Wright brothers ultimately cracked this problem is they were really clever about how they experimented. Before they flew a plane, they flew a kite. The great thing about kites is when they crash, and they always do, it's easy for you to try again. To optimize their kites, in 1901, they built this. Bicycle spoke wire, a cardboard box, and a fan creates what we now call a wind tunnel. Imagine how it felt. Back in 1901, a bunch of people were working on crazy contraptions that were crashing, and the Wright brothers used this to run 200 experiments in 2 months. Fundamentally changed the way they were approaching the problem and ultimately helped inform the solution that became Kitty Hawk and led to the modern aviation age of today. Fourth and finally, you need the conviction to persevere. I'll talk more about what specifically appears here in just a couple minutes. This is the credo from Johnson & Johnson. I'll talk about why this is here. But the basic point here is this is really hard stuff. It's not going to happen overnight. There are going to be setbacks. There are going to be stumbles. There are going to be false steps. There are probably going to be failures along the way. You need to view this as a journey, and you need to have the conviction to persevere when bad things happen. I'll talk in just a minute about some of the things that we think can help build that conviction. But before I do that, I want to open up the second poll here. I'm curious to hear from you, which of these 4 C's is the biggest gap inside your organization? The courage to choose before the platform burns, the clarity to focus on the highest potential opportunity areas, the curiosity to explore and try, and the conviction to persevere when stumbles occur. Kristen, let's open up that second poll here. Let's get votes from our attendees, and let's see if we can somehow break the trend that you get less participation as webinars continue on. We're up to 50% of you, so keep voting, keep voting. This is really exciting stuff to be able to see the real-time results. Clarity is pulling ahead by a pretty wide margin. We've got just a few seconds left in the poll. We're almost at 70%. Past patterns hold. It looks like we will fall a little bit short of first participation, but we stayed pretty balanced. That's good. So let's show the results on screen here. You can see that clarity did end up being the #1 vote. 43% of you said this is the thing we're missing in our organization. We see this frequently. We'll talk about a process that can build clarity in just a second, followed by courage, and then a tie for last with curiosity and conviction. I would note that when I've asked this poll all around the globe, there isn't a dominant force. I almost always see some dispersion depending on the group. And I think the key thing is that you really need to have all of these things working simultaneously. There's no silver bullet. There's no miracles. You need all of this working in your organization. Let's flip back to the slide deck and let's talk a little bit about how you can go and build some of these things and move forward with your dual transformation strategy. And then we'll talk, we'll have another chance to get questions from the audience. So again, if you've got a question that you haven't asked, now's a great time to type it in, so Evan can curate some of the best in just a few minutes. The biggest challenge in all of these things is that organizations aren't built to do this. I titled the slide, "We have met the enemy and it is us." A consistent stream of research over the last few decades shows how hard this is for large organizations. In the 1980s, one of my mentors, Dick Foster, who was an advisor to our company, Innosight, for a number of years, wrote this book, The Attacker's Advantage, Why Leading Companies Abruptly Lose Their Markets to New Competitors. In the 1990s, our co-founder, Clayton Christensen, was even more ominous, The Innovator's Dilemma, When New Technologies Cause Great Firms to Fail. The titles get scarier as the years go on. A couple years ago, Dave Ulmer, who we work with at a number of large companies at which he worked, wrote a book called The Innovator's Extinction, How Best Intentions and Natural Selection Will Drive Your Company into the Grave. Organizations are built to do what they are currently doing, better, faster, and cheaper. They build reinforcing systems that help them do that, even better, even faster, even cheaper. If you're trying to reinvent and reimagine a business, the biggest enemy that you face is inside your organization. What do you do? What can you do to inoculate yourself from this? You notice the great pun in the headline here, Evan, where we've got two ends in there, innovation, and Innosight can help provide this inoculation. Two key components here. The first is building what we call a future-backed strategy. This is what can help bring clarity about what we're going to do. Future is the destination. That starts by saying, what will the world look like in some future date, 5, 10, 15 years in the future? And what do we want our organization to look like? As you begin to imagine and create the story of your future state, that's when you begin to say, these are the things we're going to do, and these are the things we're not going to do. Back in the future back then is the path to the future. It starts with, can you remind me of the verb tense here? Is this the future pluperfect? Evan, do I remember that correctly?
I think that's right.
The future pluperfect. What will have been? What will be the steps you will have to take to take what might look like an unimaginable future and make it something that's a reality? And of course, what will be that first precious step that you take to begin moving in a new direction? Now, it's key that this isn't something about what tomorrow is going to look like, because tomorrow is going to look pretty much like today. This is at least 5 years in the future. This is something that is not outsourced to a third party. A third party, of course, can help, but it's something that your leaders really own, and it's something where you know you're not going to be precise. Mark Johnson, our co-author, likes to describe it as an impressionist painting, but you're really crisp about the assumptions that you're making. That's one component that enables you to maximize your chances of successfully pulling off dual transformation. The other is to make sure that this is grounded in a motivating, humanizing purpose. You see here a picture that we snapped of the cover of Dual Transformation in front of that credo at Johnson & Johnson. This is something that is so important to Johnson & Johnson that it is etched in granite in its world headquarters. That credo starts with this: our first responsibility is to the doctors, nurses, patients, mothers, fathers, and all others who use our products and services. It goes on to talk about the communities in which Johnson & Johnson operates. It then talks about the employees who work for Johnson & Johnson. And finally, at the very bottom, it says, and if we do all of these things, our shareholders will realize a fair return. This is critical because you can imagine if you're in Johnson & Johnson, someone would naturally ask the question, why are we doing disease interception? $30 billion we make selling pharmaceutical products. Why would we want to stop that? And people come back to the credo. They say, this is the right thing for us to do. It's consistent with who we are. It's what gives us purpose and meaning and the conviction to persevere. When you get one of these things right, a company becomes instantly recognizable by it. The Earth's most customer-centric, well, that's a customer-centric company, that's Amazon. The power to share and make the world more open and connected, that's Facebook. Organize the world's information, that's Google. You know the organization by its statement of purpose. The last one I'm going to show here is one of my favorite little stories, again, a Singapore example. This is an organization that had a strange problem. Its customers kept coming back. And because its customers kept coming back, its employees were really unhappy. What type of organization is this, you ask? Well, it's a prison, the Singapore Prison Services. You go back a couple decades ago, and there were high levels of recidivism and very low employee morale. A new leader came in and worked to come up with a new statement of purpose. We aspire to be captains in the lives of offenders committed to our custody. They are temporarily under our control. Our goal is to rehabilitate them, send them out, and have them never come back. Today, the Singapore Prison Services is a world benchmark, some of the lowest rates of recidivism in the world, and incredibly high employee satisfaction. Your effort to drive transformation needs to go beyond numbers. It needs to talk about both what you do, what we call the job to be done, and why you do it. And it has to layer into the mythology, the stories that are a part of your organization. This is, again, what will give you the conviction to persevere when times get tough. I'm going to use this as the quasi-summary slide. I've got a couple of slides to show at the end just to tie together the themes we've talked about. But these are some questions that you can take back to spur a discussion around dual transformation with your leadership team. I won't read the questions. They are pretty clear here. You'll also see in the slide deck, if you choose to download it later on, we've got a pretty simple self-diagnostic that you can use here to also spur discussion in your group. But I will use this as our final chance to pause and get a couple questions if some good ones have come in, Evan, before I provide just a couple concluding thoughts and call it a webinar. So again, if you haven't typed your question in, now is your last chance to do so. Evan, what good ones can you throw at me?
That's right. We have a number of good ones. Someone asked a simple question about transformation B. Why not just spin it off as a separate company for future creation?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the basic argument here is you are in transformation B doing something that only you can do. And this is why that capabilities link is so critical. Janssen could not do disease interception if it was not connected to Johnson & Johnson. It's pulling a lot of technologies, it's pulling sales capabilities and other things to enable that to work. So if you are doing this right, that transformation B is enabled and empowered by being connected to a larger entity. If you have not figured out the unique capabilities that you are leveraging, and you can't see a reason why it's part of your organization, sure, by all means, go and invest in a startup company, create a spin-out organization. But what we're talking about here is confronting that innovator's dilemma head-on and turning it into the innovator's opportunity. Is this easy to do? Absolutely not. This is incredibly difficult to do, but it can enable you to do something that nobody else can do.
What would you say is the best tool for selecting or choosing your transformation B opportunity? Is it in the realm of Six Sigma or lean methodologies? We have a question about, are there any tools out there like design thinking that could help you locate where you're going in that next new growth area?
Certainly, if given the choice between Six Sigma and design thinking to go and imagine and discover the future, I would lean strongly towards design thinking, because a good design thinker starts with the customer and starts with the human who is the customer and tries to develop that empathetic connection to them to understand in our language the job they're struggling to get done. In chapter 6 of the book, where we talk about the clarity to focus, we provide a front row seat when, as one of our clients, Manila Water, goes through its process of picking its strategic opportunity areas, the big planks of its growth platform, to describe in gory detail some of the ways you can approach the problem. But I certainly think any tool that has imagination at its core, that's got the customer at its core, that's focusing on the problem not solved or the job to be done, that's the kind of tool that you want to pick up. Six Sigma is really good at core optimization. What you're currently doing better, faster, cheaper, this is a very different sort of problem.
That's great. How would you measure the success of transformation be? We have a metrics question. Do you use the same metrics that you use for the core business, or do you have different KPIs?
Yeah, very clearly, and Clark talks about this in some of the first-hand vignettes that are in the book. Very clearly, the metrics for B have got to be different than the metrics for A, particularly in the early days. A is about delivery. It's about execution. So those are more operationally focused metrics. B is about discovering the future. So those are more like the tools that venture capitalists use as they're working with startup companies to help them figure out what will be a scalable and successful business model. So it's more about learning than about earning. Now, of course, you've got to deliver results. So you're not doing this for sport or for fun. You're ultimately hoping to build a material business. So you also have to hold that group accountable. This isn't meant to be a sinkhole or a free spending place. They have to show that there's a path to profits there. But if you don't measure them in different ways, I guarantee you're going to get one of them wrong. How about one final question if you got it?
One more as an example. We have a question about Amazon. And what would you say are the capabilities that they've chosen to link their A and B?
Yeah, so Amazon, I think, is a great example to show the power of link capabilities. So why is Amazon Web Services so darn good? Well, Amazon runs these sorts of systems at scale inside its own organization. So it is able to use all the things that it does to operate its global e-commerce engine, to pour that into Amazon Web Services and make sure technology remains cutting edge. Remember, this started as an internal IT project, so it was closely and inextricably linked to who Amazon is. You then use the ability that Amazon has to get in front of everybody through its ubiquitous web presence and ability to brand and so on. That's another capability that allows it to do things that some of the competitors struggle with. So I think some pretty clear examples of capabilities that AWS has leaned on, while also, of course, all the different things that it needs to do to succeed, leading to some pretty wide separation from core operations. Well, thank you all for the good questions. You certainly kept me on my toes as we're going through today's discussion. Let me end by providing just a few summary remarks. So this is my colleague and co-author, Clark Gilbert. He speaks from firsthand knowledge, again, having done this in a couple of organizations, when he says this is the hardest problem in business today. And this is indeed an incredibly tough challenge. You probably heard the metaphor, you're changing the engine in the plane while it's flying or in the ship while it's sailing or whatever. This is even more than that. When you are driving dual transformation, you are simultaneously changing the engine on your plane while you are building an army of drones that are moving your business in new and different directions. And some of the leaders who we profiled in the book will describe how difficult this is. From some of the biggest companies in the world like Aetna, Mark Bertolini talking about this being a continuous process, to smaller organizations like Manila Water, which is about a $500 million business that talks where Ferg de la Cruz talks about the importance of resilience, or Settlement Music School, 108-year-old not-for-profit in the Philly area, where Helen Eaton talks about how there will be moments where you question deeply. This is indeed one of the hardest challenges in business today. Another piece of research that we did recently looked at organizations that had done this. I will highlight here points 4 and 5 and some of the lessons that we learned. If you're going to do this, leaders need to be engaged. You need highly engaged employees, and that only comes if leaders communicate. They've got a compelling future-backed view of the organization. They've got a story, and they are consistently and routinely messaging that story and getting people excited about it. I do think this is indeed the hardest challenge in business today, but I also think, and this is me, this is my bobblehead, affectionately known as Skoda. This is my body grafted onto the body of Yoda. That's another story for another day. But my belief is this is the greatest opportunity in business today, because when disruption strikes, it is that moment. It's that moment where if you're a laggard in an industry, you can become a leader. It's that moment where you can go and create a big booming growth business that changes the face of an industry or even a country in some cases. It's the moment when you are creating your legacy. Incredibly difficult, no doubt, but also incredibly exciting. And we hope through what we've described in the book and some of the tools that we've created around it, we give you the ability to begin your journey. I have a personal belief. My belief is the greatest untapped source of energy in the world is not in the wind, it's not in the water, it's not in the sun. It's inside our institutions that are capable of doing so much more. We hope that you use the ideas in dual transformation and some of the other things that we and other thought leaders have written to go and realize all the potential that I know exists within your organization. Thank you very much and good luck.
Well, thank you, Scott, and thank you all for attending today's webinar on dual transformation. We will be sending out an email with the recording of today's session and all the slides, and you could forward it to your colleagues. And we welcome you to contact us through insight.com, where there's some more tools on our website. Scott is on Twitter at Scott D. Anthony, and we would also welcome you for sending Scott an email directly at the address on your screen. So on behalf of Insight, he's santhony@insight.com, we thank you and enjoy the rest of the day.